welcome to The Found Cause, where we found our cause in serving the Lord Jesus Christ. I'm Michael, the man behind the machine, and to my right, your left is...
Sebastian, the bookkeeper.
And virtually, we have...
Theodore, under the PC.
Hey, Theodore. You know what today is. It's not actually today, because we're recording at a different time, and it's not even the time you're listening to this, because we already missed it. But our Sunday, so your two past Sundays, if you're listening to this on Facebook, was Reformation Day, also known as Halloween. I know it is Halloween because I come from a regular family, but to those Christian families out there that remember days like that, it's also Reformation Day, celebrating Reformation, trying to get rid of the devil's favorite holiday, Halloween. So, in honor of Reformation Day, we got a hammer, but we're not cavemen. Martin Luther, of course, starts the Reformation by nailing his 95 Theses onto the church door, the message board of the church. There's some myths about that, everybody gathered around it and was like, oh man, it was a big moment, but it was really a pretty mundane moment, a normal thing for him to do. But in honor of him, we were planning to take Sebastian's laptop, which he has written about 95 Theses for the modern church, and we were going to find the message board for the church. I think it's online these days, and we were just going to nail it in. So, Sebastian, you want to hand it over? I'm just kidding. We're not going to do that. We're not dumb like Martin Luther. The question, the topic for today's episode, what do we do for Reformation Day? We're not reacting to some crazy heretics on YouTube. We're not reacting to some crazy theology particular topic. We're going to talk all things Reformation. We're going to talk about, was the Reformation good? Was it bad? What were the good parts? What were the bad parts? A hint, there's both. What would it take for a modern day Reformation? And then... what would we even reform to in the church? So we're going to take the history, which is Sebastian's favorite part, and then we're going to take the modern application, which is Theodore's favorite part, and we're going to keep Michael from nailing things, which is everyone's favorite part, and go from there.
Or people.
I hardly nail anybody. Okay, here we go. Reformation Day, topic number 1. Was the Reformation good or bad? Let's take a poll just amongst us three. Was it good or bad, Sebastian?
Hands down, good.
All right. Theodore, what do you think?
Hands up, good.
All right. I also think the Reformation is good. What do you know? We're all Protestants, so not very surprising. However, I will say, I listen to pundits out there, Catholic and Protestant, political and non-political, and there are some Catholic pundits, if you know them, Michael Knowles from Daily Wire, also Matt Walsh, that are really anti the Protestant Reformation because they're Catholics, and so they consider the Reformation, of course, evil. There are also some like some of the conservative resurgence and the manly men out there with the big beards, and they're pro-Trump and they're anti-Biden and they're anti-vaccine, whatever. So I've got a warm heart for them. They're super into Eastern Orthodoxy, as I had said last week when we reacted to somebody being kind to the Eastern Orthodox. But equally, they're also often into Catholicism for whatever reason. They're like the fringe, extra Orthodox movements of those two generally weak and liberal churches. So the Protestant Reformation is sometimes maligned as something that was actually an overall bad for Europe, that pre-Reformation Europe was a better, more Christian Europe that was more unified and had all the law of God and blah, blah, blah. I aspire to a godly society. So part of me is if that's really what the Reformation did, which was made a less godly society, then yes, it was bad. And there were parts of the Reformation that we should own up to. So let's first talk about the bad parts of the Reformation before we talk into some of the obvious goods. The Reformation, just as a summary. Maybe, Sebastian, you can give a summary of the Reformation since you're the history man.
Yes. And please, I'm going to start with this right away. We're not called Protestants because we protest. I think I lose a year of my life whenever someone says we protest, hence why we're called Protestants. No, that came much later at the Diet of Speyer in Germany, when the political princes of the Holy Roman Empire back then, they were complaining about to the Catholic Emperor about enforcing Catholicism. So, very different.
And protest is a formal way of saying we disagree with the law. That's why it's called protest.
Exactly. They just so happened to be evangelicals, which is the word Luther wanted ascribed to his movement. Not Lutherans, not Protestants, evangelicals. With that out of the way. It's normally Reformation Day celebrated on October 31st because that's the day, 1517, is when Luther went to the church in Wittenberg and posted his thesis there. It wasn't anything dramatic. It wasn't anything, there wasn't a crowd of people holding their faces. There weren't babies, crying in admiration at the moment. He wasn't, kissing any babies either. It was just, your normal morning. I have some ideas. Who's going to take me up to debate? And then next, there would be like missing goat, grandma of the town has cookies prepared for everybody for All Saints Day. It wasn't anything dramatic. And it just so happened that he was criticizing something very, very important happening at the time, the sale of indulgences, which was a magic piece of paper that you could fill in the blank. They mass produced these, by the way, that you could put in the name of your dead relative after giving money to the church, the Catholic Church. You could get an indulgence, and then that would shorten the time of someone in purgatory. We have gone over the theology of Roman Catholicism, so this is just an overview. You can look at our Catholic videos for more information on purgatory and the church itself and all the funny moments that the church has gone to. But that was the main critique Luther was giving. And he was convinced that he wasn't leaving the church. He actually wanted the Pope and his supervisors to know, hey, there are these really weird people who are extortioning money out of poor peasants. It's like, do you know this about this Archbishop of Mainz, Pope? Do you know about this degenerate person, Tetzel, who is making these weird rhymes and saying obscene things? Like, even if you rape the Virgin Mary, my indulgences can forgive those sins. So, and little did he know that it was the Pope and the Archbishop who were behind Tetzel. So that's what got him into trouble. That's what led to all the things that we know in the Reformation spiraling.
Peter's giving us some visual
Oh,
flair
yes.
with the indulgence money. Yeah. So, in summary, classic. I mean, you learn this in like every Lutheran school. I never went to Lutheran school, so I would know. But Theodore, you did. That Martin Luther was initially mainly against indulgences, the money-making sale of the forgiveness of sins, which is, of course, anti the gospel. It's what Jesus told the disciples not to do, not to acquire money, silver, or gold for their money belts as they go out and share the gospel. So that's the indulgences is not right. Of course, it doesn't pay any sins at all. It's all alive from the Catholic Church. However, like you're saying, Sebastian, it wasn't supposed to be a splitting of the church. It was supposed to be a reforming of the existing church, not a societal breakdown of everything. But like you said, there were a couple. There's a lot of tinder at the moment for for Martin Luther's actions to ignite a lot of societal change, because previous movements that had regionally created a lot of change and upheaval had happened before and had been snuffed out by the Catholic Church in the past. So the revolution of Jan Hus in Czechoslovakia, modern-day Czechoslovakia, or Czechia today, and Waldo in Italy and southern France.
Where's Waldo?
And Tyndale in England. There had been reformers of different regions, but this particular Reformation happened in the heart of the Holy Roman Empire, which was the biggest nation in Europe technically at the time, so it hit a lot of the population centers of Europe, and it directly countered the Pope, and Martin Luther, importantly, ends up being able to escape execution and live, and so... and there was the printing press out, and they had already seen a couple Reformations die and fail, so this one was like set up to succeed. In any case, so it wasn't that the particular issues at hand were worse or better than like hundreds of years prior, but it was time to change, and God set it up to change. And interestingly, if you follow our history that we've been going through, church history on your own, the other churches around the world, because there are churches that were godly churches outside of the Roman Catholic Church at the time, they had also started to wane. So it was kind of like a worldwide period of waning, for the most part, of righteous living amongst Christians. And so God was reigniting something in the Western Church, which is what I would call the Catholic Church, the Western Church, to come back to his faith. So were there real Christians in Europe? Undoubtedly. And were there no real Christians like for 100 years prior to the Reformation? No, I protest that view. But the Reformation was an important changing of the church as a whole, and of course, I would say that's a good thing. So that said, let's talk about the bad parts of the church, because of the Reformation, starting with, I'll say one, and then we can go around. One of the bad things that the Protestant Reformation caused was war. So at the time, and still I would argue kind of happens today, a state and a culture is created by its religion. And so the countries of Europe at the time had different cultures because they had different languages and different kings. However, they were united in a common Christian culture, and that is mainly a Roman Catholic Christian culture. And the Roman Catholic Church overplayed its importance. And so even if different regions were different technically by the way they did their religious practices and beliefs, they all believed themselves to be Roman Catholic and adherence to the Pope and other things like that. So when the Protestant Reformation was splitting from what the Pope said was true and what the Roman Catholic Church said was true, it caused a societal split where you had to choose either to be with the Roman Catholics or against the Roman Catholics, which was a super political issue at the time, because to go with the Roman Catholic Church was to go with your particular country. And if you went against the Roman Catholic Church, you could be going against your particular country. You couldn't just be your little state. It couldn't just be your family was going to be different. You either were with the country or against the country. And so whole countries were flipped. After, one day later, whole countries would go Protestant or whole countries would go Roman Catholic, and they'd want to purge all the people who didn't agree with them from the country. And so that kind of chaos created what's called a 30 Years' War, which is wars of religion, which was foreign powers from around Germany, the Holy Roman Empire, trying to attack their Holy Roman Empire to change its entire official religion to either Protestantism or Catholicism. And so most of the countries in Europe got involved at one point or another throughout the 30 years, and they would ransack towns, completely destroying them, robbing them, killing the people, as part of these wars to try to get portions of the empire or whole portions of modern-day Germany and a little bit more territory to choose either Protestantism or Catholicism, because if you were a Protestant country yourself, like Denmark or Sweden, they would want to change Germany into being a Protestant country because religion and politics were so united. If Germany was Protestant, they were likely to be friends and friendly and stop warring against the Danes and the Swedes and the Norwegians. But on the flip side, countries like France were Catholic, and they wanted the Holy Roman Empire to be Catholic. So it caused a lot of wars. The 30 Years' War is said to have the biggest impact on the population of Europe since the Black Death. So populations plummeted, a lot of people died, and there was a lot of suffering and wealth destroyed in the 30 Years' War. So that is a bad part of any big societal upheaval, is that a lot of people died in societal upheaval.
A great irony is that it actually started with Bohemia, with Czechia, in which the Palatinate reformed individual, he inherited the throne of Bohemia, so it was like, big no, you can't have a Protestant be in charge of Bohemia. Ironically, the land of Jan Hus, who's someone who preceded Luther.
Any other bad things? Certainly there are. Do you guys have any bad parts of the Reformation?
Yes, I do have.
Well, I had two good things.
Well, save it. Yeah, we got plenty of good things.
Oh, okay. I thought we already mentioned some good things.
No, Theodore. We have to drop some bad things first. So it led to a lot of crazy people who would have been snuffed out by the church to roam freely. And you might be saying, it's terrible, to our American ears to condemn people or either banish them. Most people were actually banished. As I'm reading about the radicals,
just go to a different country, right? That's what they want you to do.
Yes, and they actually did that. So executions were not as common. It was mostly later on during the wars of religion that you see heresy trials, executions, and whatnot. But early on, people are just banished. So only very rarely are they burned at the stake or hanged or drowned, whatever. Anyway, there were a lot of crazy people who didn't conform to either the Catholics nor the Lutherans, the evangelicals at the time, so they went their own way. They're known as the radicals. That's their name. The most famous one would be the city of Münster, in which you can see cages today of the people that after a battle they were hanging there.
And we would consider the people that tried to reform the radicals in Münster were truly radical, polygamists,
Adamites.
Adamites. They were actually heretics, evil, deceiving their people, hurting their people, crazy cults. So we would all sit there and condemn that group. And they were stirred up by, the fact that there was people questioning the Roman Catholic Church and the religions of the day. And so naturally they also questioned Protestantism and Lutheranism of the day. And so they made their own fringe cult, which again is a product of unconformity.
Mm-hmm.
Now, some of the radicals were not that radical, and we would consider them good today. Like Anabaptism, being baptized again, is something that we practice today as Baptists. We get baptized as believers. We practice credo baptism, but that was considered radical in the day because it was changing the way countries officially recognized how many people they had in towns. So before they used babies, they were baptized, their name would be put down on the church rolls as being baptized and a member of that church. And so the counts and lords and nation kings would go around to towns and collect taxes based on the church rolls, the baptismal rolls of churches. But Credo Baptists believe that you got baptized when you actually became a dedicated Christian, and that would change the way taxes were assigned and populations were counted. And so that was considered radical, and there were a lot of reformers, including John Calvin, who I respect, who were viciously against that because they believed it would cause a breakdown of society, and they thought it was unnecessarily antagonistic against the powers of the day. And so they would create, I think, wrong theologies like covenant theology to try to defend baby baptism and condemn Anabaptism. So Anabaptists sometimes were crazy, like they were the Munsterites, or they were some of the Mennonites who I disagree with their principles, not all of them, but I disagree with some of their principles. However, some of them were natural, like regular, just all they were was Anabaptists, and everything else about them was Orthodox, and they were persecuted.
The worst of all were the anti-Trinitarians, which would come out in this time period too. Unitarians, they would flee. Again, many were not killed, executed on the spot. They were just kicked out of town. So they went to either the mountains of Transylvania, where they had an official Unitarian country for a while, or Poland. And then some random pieces of Poland were Unitarian. But yeah, you had a bunch of randos who would not have been allowed, for example, to preach or teach or live, had been unified.
Yeah. Do you have any bad things about the Protestant Reformation, Theodore?
I think the greenhouse gases from burning people at stake and just kidding.
Terrible. Yeah, global warming.
No, I did.
I would say one of the common complaints I hear about the Protestant Reformation, but I do want to push back on this, is that the Protestant Reformation opened up this whole time of questioning things, kind of like the Renaissance supposedly did that too. And so questioning things led to the Enlightenment, and the Enlightenment is a time where they questioned everything. So not only was it cool scientific advancement, as we say today, that was, that we call the Enlightenment a good thing, but often people point to it and say it's actually a bad thing because it caused societal division, right? People weren't united, they were divided, even within nations. So it caused more civil war, and it caused people to become secularists. And of course, secularism is the plague of the modern day, of all these countries in Europe, the United States, and North America becoming secular, and communism becoming secular, and secularism is an evil fake religion. So they credit Protestantism with questioning orthodoxy, and those who also question orthodoxy are secularists, and so they say, ergo, Protestantism created secularism.
I would say to everybody, this is when knowing history and funny Pope moments actually create a beautiful harmony, because what had happened just 100 years before Luther, there were three people at the same time claiming to be the one and only true Pope, and countries in Europe did not know what the heck was going on. They were allying with somebody, then there would switch alliances, they would support one candidate. This went on for almost 80 years. So you're telling me that Protestant Reformation caused division? And see, this is even worse, because you're supposed to only have one pope, but now you have three. For a second, you had four popes, but then they only had one. They killed the other ones. So they had one.
And I would say that the Protestant Reformation was not what caused the Enlightenment. A lot of people say that, but the Protestant Reformation happened and stuck around for like 150, 200 years before the Enlightenment really kicked off. So although they happened sequentially, right, it happened before the Enlightenment happened after the Protestant Reformation, I would not credit the Protestant Reformation for the Enlightenment. I believe the Enlightenment is much more of a product of the societal changes amongst families, which really doesn't have much to do with Protestantism. It has to do with industrialization and the furthering of technology. So I would say that the industrialization, the Industrial Revolution, caused the Enlightenment, not the Protestant Reformation. So the Protestant Reformation was very conservative for what it was. Like we just said, they were totally against Anabaptists for the most part. So all of Europe still had lists for heretics, right? And people like John Calvin, reformers like Ulrich Zwingli, and even Luther himself and his predecessors, they hated heretics, and they would pursue unity and control and hierarchical society,
church and state,
and all the church and state stuff. So they were pretty looking for stability. So the fact that there was wars of religion and questioning of the Roman Catholic Church, I do not think produced the Enlightenment. We know it doesn't produce the Enlightenment, because the Enlightenment doesn't happen in 1520. It doesn't happen in 1650. It happens in 1700 or 1690, 1720. And those are the times when, yes, Protestantism was entrenched. However, Enlightenment thinkers often came from countries like Austria and Italy
France.
and France. And these places had Protestants like any other place, but they were majority Catholics. And so it wasn't like the Protestants were the ones creating Enlightenment thinking. Again, I think Enlightenment thinking comes from universities sticking around for a while and from the breakdown of the family structure and industrialization. So I would say those things caused it. So the Enlightenment, you could argue, is good or bad, and that's for a different discussion. But I would not say the Protestant Reformation caused the Enlightenment, so I refute that bad thing about the Reformation. Any other bad things you guys can think of? We have massive war, we have abundance of heretics, and we have a refutation of the fact that it created the Enlightenment.
The Peasants' War?
The Peasants' War, yes. So it's not the war of religion that I was talking about. It's not the 30 Years' War, but it was a result of the Protestant Reformation, and that is the peasants of northern Germany decided to rebel and not pay their taxes to their lords, believing that that the law of God precluded them from doing it. Like, they believed that they were lawfully not required to pay their dues to their landlords because they were free in Christ. And so they used as an excuse Martin Luther's teachings of the fact that they weren't beholden to the Roman Catholic Church, and that we should go back to the law of God and other, like, taking Christianity seriously, to advocate for essentially the overthrow of their current landlords, which caused a massive political problem in northern Germany, because the northern German lords said, no, we do own this land, and so you can't just take it from us and not pay your taxes. And so they went and killed a ton of peasants, and the peasants would burn down cities and other things like that. So there was a peasant war in northern Germany, but Martin Luther, to his credit, some people would call it his discredit because the title of this book, but he wrote a whole book and treatise against peasant uprisings, and he was very pro, especially because of the chaos at the time, very pro orderly governing bodies and not uprisings like the peasant rebellion. So he wrote a book called something like against the stinking masses of peasants and their filthy lies, or something like that. It'll go long.
Something harsh, yes.
Yes. And so Martin Luther himself was anti this, but it was a result of his teaching, you could say.
Question or clarification. The peasants would probably not have been able to read the Bible, right?
It depends. I mean,
No, they would have.
If
they would have been able to hear it, at least, even if the literacy rates weren't great.
If they were to be able to read all of it, they would have read, like, work with your hands, be in debt to no one, serve your earthly master, like, not like God, but serve God and serve your earthly master.
Yeah, yes, they would have. Yes, I would say they were much more interested in the political aspects of the law of God, which, I mean, I'm also interested in those too. It's just they were using it, I think, fundamentally as an excuse. So, Theodore, you're right. The Bible doesn't call for mass peasant uprisings, and it has a godly role for government. It doesn't call for the overthrow of government for no reason, or for high taxes. There are calls for resisting particular laws from the government, but it doesn't mean replacing your government. It just means resisting the particular laws the government is doing wrong. And so, yes, if they were taking the Bible and it's full, they wouldn't have done it, and that's what Luther argued as well. But because they now had there was a little bit of chaos in the elites, they decided to use it, I think, as an excuse to overthrow their lords. And so, like Sebastian was about to say, Luther did translate the Bible into German, the common tongue. So now they had the Bible that was understandable to them. Even if they couldn't read it, they could hear it from their clergymen and hear about the law of God and hear some new ideas. So, again, I guess you can fairly say that Lutheranism caused the peasant revolt. But frankly, peasant revolts happened all the time. And so it wasn't like this was a super rare occurrence in history that only occurred because of the Protestant Reformation. It did occur because of the Protestant Reformation in this case, but there were many other peasant revolts in the past that nobody seems to talk about because they weren't caused by anything except for peasants being upset. So I would say, yes, that's a bad thing. Yes, it was caused by the Protestant Reformation, but it's not ridiculously bad, and I would say it's not a rarity. It's not unique to the Protestant Reformation. All right. It's Reformation Day, so enough down on the dirt about the Protestant Reformation. We all said the Protestant Reformation was a good thing overall. So what makes it a good thing? Theodore, you said you had two things. How about you start us out? What are two good things about the Reformation?
I have 4 things now. Well, you mentioned that Martin Luther translated the Bible, and turns out he did that while he was, like, in hiding, right?
Yeah.
And he translated the New Testament from Greek to German in 2.5 months. So that's a positive. And his influence in reform, church reform, educational reform, so that more people could be educated and able to read the Bible for themselves. And then eventually, today, basically everybody can have access to the Bible in their language. So
right. Which we would call a good thing. I mean, some would call it a bad thing. Like some hardcore Roman Catholics out there say that you shouldn't be able to interpret your Bible yourself and you need to go through the priest. Otherwise, you come up with crazy interpretations yourself. But we would all say the Word of God is edifying. We want to be able to read it ourselves. We greatly enjoy it. We learn from it. It creates better Christians. And so, yes, we appreciate that product of the Reformation.
Yeah. I think we'd all agree. En masse, there's things that are clear enough that basically allow us to understand God as we should, and also receive salvation. Oh, and then one thing I was just a quick quip. I was thinking it's better for one person to be saved and changed by God than for 100 or 1,000 or however many people to think that they can earn salvation themselves or change themselves and not understand God as we believe that God would have us understand him.
Right. So even if you had the entirety of Europe being Christian, whereas now you have some secularists like Europe has, and then some real Christians, that it's better to have real Christians than to have no real Christians, which I agree, because that's really the dichotomy. It is better. It's better to have a Catholic society than to have like a Hindu society, I would argue, because it's closer to the law of God. However, I would trade a real Christian amongst a bunch of Hindus for no real Christians and a bunch of Catholics any day, like you're saying. So I agree. Having real Christians in Europe is a great boon. So the fact that the Protestant Reformation brought the real gospel of the free gift of Jesus Christ that fully pays for your debt is a much better thing than the order that was before, but that repressed the gospel.
All this goes to say the gospel was present before, I would say, in my humble opinion, the Fourth Lateran Council, when the Catholics doubled down on transubstantiation, the need that you have to go to Mass, get the sacrifice, re-sacrifice, unbloody sacrifice of Jesus, get your salvation every time, repetitive, to do penance, you need to do things in order to earn the grace of God and merit it in that sense. So until then, I would say, from 0 to 1200s, you would have had real Christians in Europe, but after that, Christianity around the world starts to get just down.
Yeah, no, I would argue that just because the church official made something, like they had the Fourth Lateran Council and made some unchristian things official, they emphasized the Eucharist, not the word Greek Thanksgiving, but the false version, the false gospel of the Eucharist, that pays for your sin somehow, that the church official had gone astray. But there were still local churches that were preaching faithfully. There were still faithful Christians in Europe, and I would argue in Eastern Europe and the East as well. However, the majority of the church had turned away, which is always a bad thing. So the Reformation, I would say, in toto, turned the church back to the proper gospel. So prior to the Reformation, they were real Christians. Post the Reformation, they were real Christians. But the church at large turning back to Christ is good. We shouldn't poo-poo that.
Here's a good thing that most people might not think about, that priests could marry now because of the Protestant Reformation. It's something that historians of all people got right before any other Christian denomination. In the 400s, they said, you can't be a celibate monk. You have to get married as a priest. So,
and we would hold today, my denomination, Baptist, Reformed Baptists in particular, hold that elders, so leaders, priests in the church, that they should be married, as Paul states in 1 and 2 Timothy. So we would say a qualification for an elder is being married today. And there's some arguments around that, but certainly there's no requirement not to be married. I think we'd all agree with that. So I agree that priests being married is a good thing. No longer are they priests. We're all priests. So they're just the leaders of the church, the elders of the church.
Yeah, you get what I'm saying.
And the pastors that are married not only can, I think, minister better to married couples, which is what most people say that Paul's intention is for the requirements for eldership being marriage, is so that you can witness to other married couples. But I think it's also good for the purity of that particular man, because there is, and I believe were, major problems with supposedly celibate monks who weren't really gifted with celibacy, and so they would go and sleep around, whether with women or men or boys or whatever. So there's many stories in the Middle Ages of monks and priests abusing animals, women, and boys alike. And so today, the same, I think, notoriously. So we would say that a celibate priesthood is probably not celibate, and therefore they should not be called to celibacy. And I've talked about this in this podcast before, but I think in the modern days, we're so anti-marriage that one of the big problems in America is rampant sexual immorality. And I think one of the big obvious conclusions of having sexual morality is to call for Christians to get married if they're having sexual issues. Not to just like marry anybody, but to strive to get married, not to delay marriage. And on that topic, we don't do that today. So I think that equivalently with the Reformation, maybe we'll talk about that in a third part of this episode, some things the church could be doing differently today mirror what they tried to do in the Reformation back in the day, which was encourage marriage. Martin Luther would go out and break up nunneries. When regions would convert to Protestantism, they would make nunneries and monasteries illegal because they didn't want this practice of godly celibacy staying. You could be celibate, right? But don't make it like your requirement for your sect, right? Your little club, your nunnery club, or your monastery club. So they would break them up, and they'd try to get monks to marry women for godly marriages and bringing up offspring and the edification of the two, all the reasons for marriage. And so Martin Luther ends up actually marrying one of the nuns that he freed from a nunnery.
Yes, on the note of just marrying someone random, don't pull a Luther, that it actually was a happy coincidence that they were both fit for one another. I would say for the providence of God, but
well, he didn't want. I mean,
he didn't want to marry. So but he was just marrying anybody. As you were
classic Luther. Well, I think he was impressed. Classic Luther story. If you're not familiar, he broke up a nunnery, and usually they assign it to a bunch of monks. So usually they would try to assign the nuns with the like monastery monks, right, who also were unmarried. But there's sometimes a mismatch, and this particular nun, the one he ends up marrying, refused to marry anybody but him. So he refuses to marry her for a while because he's not in the marrying mood. Plus he's Martin Luther, and he's like, "You're coming after me for my fame, girl." But she must have impressed him enough because I think she was a head nun at the
Catalina.
Catalina. In any case, I don't know the full romance story, but he does end up submitting to marry her and does marry her. I don't believe it wasn't like a spur of the moment. He did wait and refuse her for a while, but he did end up marrying her, and she ended up being a good wife by all counts. Like, he would be depressed, he had fits of depression, he'd be depressed, praying incessantly in his basement, and she would come and chastise him for being so depressed because they had everything, right? They had Christ, so of course he didn't need to be so depressed. And he was mad at the time in his diary, but ends up like thanking his wife for being like that. So a little cute love story for the Reformation. But in any case, I would say a non-celibate priesthood is a good thing. I would also say, if I can just keep talking, that a good thing about the Protestant Reformation was it started to break up the church and the state. It was not the thing, but I would say that if you're ever to argue that the Enlightenment came out of the Reformation, which I would say it didn't, but I would argue that the things that came in the Enlightenment, some of them came from the Reformation and wouldn't have happened otherwise. And the separation of church and state really was started in the Protestant Reformation. Not every country did it, and as we were just describing, church and state sacralism is what it's called, was still very much a thing. So many Protestant reformers you think of, John Calvin, Martin Luther, whoever, were pro-sacralism. But the seeds of separating church from state happened with the chaos that came out of the Protestant Reformation. And so I would be a certain proponent of the government, civil government, having its own sphere of authority that is separate from the church. And the church has its own sphere of authority that's separate from the government. That does not mean that the church does not influence the government doesn't influence the church. But it means that they have different spheres of authority. They don't have the same sphere of authority. So when the government says to do something, the church does not have to do it unless it's in the government's sphere of authority. If they're reaching into something they shouldn't, you don't have to do it. And equally, if the church says to do something that the government doesn't have to listen to, the government does not have to do it. Right? If the church says you need to use tax money to pay the poor, the government doesn't have to listen to the church to do that. Now, they can listen, right? If they're members of a church, they can listen to the arguments the church is giving, but they are actually ones that decide what happens with tax money. And equally, if the government says you can't meet for church, it's too dangerous, there's coronavirus outside, the church doesn't actually have to listen to the government in that regards because they're the church. They decide when they meet. It's not in the sphere of the government's authority. So those are things that came out of the Protestant Reformation because of the chaos of the Protestant Reformation, that people started to believe, yes, they started to agree with the biblical concept that there are different spheres of authority, and that because religion was constantly changing and governments were constantly changing, we should give them their own spheres and respect their own spheres of authority, which I think is the proper way of government.
Mm-hmm. It didn't help to see all the actual corruption. Like, for example, the Archbishop of Mainz, he was the governor of the city in Germany of Mainz, and also he was Archbishop of the Catholic diocese, the province. So he was both church leader of his area and governing a small city and the surroundings. So it didn't help that he was one of the main funders for indulgences, and also it was also throughout church history. There've been also a bunch of corrupt people who've been misusing their political authority and their religious authority because they were one and the same.
Mm-hmm. Any other good things, Theodore?
I'm set.
You, Sebastian?
I think we got them all.
Okay, well, hold on. We did not get them all. There's a lot of good things
Go
coming out
ahead
of the
and
Protestant Reformation. I would say also the fact that the Protestant Reformation, so it's got you reading your Bibles. We said that it's translated the scriptures. People are reading their Bibles. We've said that it produced good marriages because the priests were suddenly marrying and they were able to advise on marriage as well if they're married better. And then I said that it started to separate church and state. I think it also brought in stronger evangelism from Europe. Europe ends up being an evangelism center, whereas it used to not be. And some would say that's out of the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution. Yes, I think those things contributed. But I believe that because the Protestant Reformation came with fervor for the truth, and it produced Reformed theology, which is from the Reformation, Reformed theology, which says that God is able to save whoever he wants, regardless of how hard their heart is, and that he does have a people from every nation. It produced a lot of missionaries that came out of Europe, so they didn't just go and convert the Slavs like they had been doing for the Middle Ages. They'd go, those people are a problem, they keep invading us, let's go convert their lands, right? That's what they had done throughout the Middle Ages and the Dark Ages. But because Europe had Christianized for the most part in the time, and they had this new fervor, and they had Reformed theology behind their backs, and the confidence and courage that comes with the sovereignty of God and that God can accomplish anything, the Protestant Reformation also produced worldwide missions where they would go to Africa, they would go to China. Of course, this happened over the decades and centuries, but they would go to the places where they could and preach not just creating little outposts like the Puritans did, but also outreaching to people groups who would normally hate the gospel. And that has brought the light of the gospel in the modern day, to Africa, to China, to South America, to North America, to all the peoples of the world really have heard the gospel at this point. And so I would say that is a result of the Protestant Reformation, not the Eastern Church, not the Eastern Orthodox Church, not the Chinese Church, not the African Church, but the European Church that has evangelized the world. So the European Church is, of course, not a very great church right now as a continent, and most nations in Europe don't have great churches that are living there. So it's not some grand racist statement saying Europe is superior. It's just the tool that God used to bring the gospel to all the ends of the earth. He had already brought the gospel to all of Europe and to good parts of the world already, but he used for a good final push from Europe to push it to the rest of the world. So I think we should be thankful to the Protestant Revolution for that, and thankful to God who brought it about.
Okay. There may be actually some sound, I was thinking, that might be stretching it, Michael, but seeing the Catholic reaction to the Reformation by putting together the Jesuits, who were the evangelizers, so to say, of Catholicism, that they went as far as China, as far as, they wanted to win the Orthodox back to the Catholic fold. They went as far as Russia, they went everywhere, infiltrated everywhere. So I think that there's some sound. Yeah, it's very sound to say that such a counter-reaction, counter-reformation was needed because of how much fervor the Protestants had.
Yep. You could go on all day about some of the things the Protestant Reformation brought, but let's bring it into the modern days. We talked about the history. We talked about some of the bad things that came out of the Reformation, some of the good things. We said it's an overall good, a boon. The question is, today, there are still church issues, right? There's still things that we freak out about. There's still things we disagree with fellow brothers and sisters about. There's things that we say are dividing lines between non-Christians and Christians, people who think they're Christians, like Roman Catholics, and those who don't. What would it take today within our own church, so those who we believe are fellow Christians, or at least are claiming to be fellow Christians within our own church? And I'm excluding Roman Catholics, people that we exclude. What would it take today for there to be a reformation? What would be the line? So back on Martin Luther's day, it was salvation by faith alone, and the abuses of the church, like indulgences? Is there a similar line that we'd say, if the church does this, we need to break off from the church and reform, so much so that we would like declare the other side anathema and found our own cities and towns and move away and create little communes of just our sect? Are there issues like that today that would spur that? Are they present today? Where's the line? I'll say right now. Go ahead, Theodore.
Well, I think just today we got a pandemic of tolerance.
Yeah.
Per se. Because just like in Revelation, the angel chastises whatever church for being tolerant of evil and immorality.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And obviously many churches are doing that nowadays in order to cater to more people, or because they value their sense of compassion more than truth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I agree. And that's, I think, right now, especially during coronavirus time, especially these last 2 years, I think that the church has, it's been revealed to the conservative believing Christians in the church how political the gospel really is. And I don't mean that to be woke myself or be some freako that wants us to go like protesting in the streets with signs. I would say that because politics is just what we do, it's how we live out our beliefs, that of course Christianity, which is a belief we should hold dear to, will live out into our politics, because politics is belief. And for those who think we can separate church from politics, they're wrong, right? Because politics are run by people who have sincere beliefs. And so while I strongly agree with the separation of church and state, I strongly disagree with the separation of religion and politics, because religion is politics. They really are one and the same. You can't separate one from the other. So those who believe that you can have Christians who have radically different politics, that's something that I think needs to be reformed out of the church. So I'll give my 2 cents here. I don't think that the current political issues in the church, because there are political issues in the church right now, because there are those who believe you can have radically different politics and still be in the same body. I would say that is wrong, that there's a wrong view of politics that's so different that it needs to be excised, and that that there are churches that tolerate radically different political positions that shouldn't be tolerated. So that's rampant across the U.S. I don't think that there is such a dearth of believing churches that don't do that we would need to split off and create our own sects like they had in the Reformation time. I would say we should be true to the word Reformation and try to reform our local churches if they're pushing towards that conciliatorism, that lukewarmism like you're describing, that tolerance of evil, Theodore, whether it's homosexuality or it's abortion or it's just general laziness about spreading the gospel, or it's secularism and humanism and some of the like universalism that's brought in by modern politics and religion, the religion of the day. If it's those things, I think we should try to reform the church local. But there are enough godly churches that have reacted against that I don't think that we need to split off and make our own sects, like I had said. So I would say that we don't need the kind of Reformation that we had at the Protestant Reformation today. God has still left a godly and sizable remnant in this country that we'd be able to join up with and fight alongside of. I think it's much more productive to be able to join existing movements than it is to create a new one.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. That was also Luther's intention. He wanted, it was the enemies of God who actually kick the poor guy out rather than him leaving. I would say one that is very dear and close to my heart, that many churches around the U.S. and also around the world, in Europe probably to do it, is that they don't believe in biblical inerrancy.
Right. Mm-hmm.
That one breaks my heart into many pieces. And that one is something that I would say, this is my take on it, do as you may, that is worth, I would say, separating or something. Because if you don't believe the Bible is real, then why are we gathering here every Sunday? Why are you preaching?
Yeah, I had a very interesting, if I can go off on a tangent, I had a very interesting discussion with somebody at my church about this who believes in biblical inerrancy, but he was claiming that it shouldn't be a dividing issue because England, for example, Anglicans, who I don't think highly of, but they are technically Protestants that would technically be believers in the gospel. I just don't think often they do. But that they, by and large, reject biblical inerrancy because they say, this is the phrase they use, and I really despise it, but this is the phrase they use. They say, well, if you learned that in reality, creation wasn't in 6,000, 8,000 years, whatever numbers might be in the Genesis, that it was a literal time frame. If it wasn't that, right? So it really was 4 billion years old, because this is the issue that causes people to be non-biblically inerrant is creationism. They might have other issues that they add in there, but creationism is the one they have a problem with. Then I would still believe the Bible, and therefore I don't believe in biblical inerrancy because I allow the Bible to be errant in that part. But that's really just faithlessness. They don't believe Genesis 1 and 2. So they say, we want to believe the rest of the Bible. And so they're trying to be faithful while having faithlessness in parts of the Bible. And so they would say, if in reality Genesis 1 and 2 were incorrect, it doesn't mean I'd lose my faith. And you, biblical inerrancy people, you would lose your faith if we were able to 100% determine that Genesis 1 and 2 were wrong. And I would say, yeah. And I'll bet, fight me. I think Genesis 1 and 2 are clear enough that if they were wrong, yeah, I would leave the faith. And they go, I remember, actually, if I can even say this, Theodore, one of our internal discussions right before the podcast was even a podcast with just our small group that this podcast started from, with our friend Isaiah, who was on the first couple episodes. He was coming out of the same kind of school of thought that, would you reject Christianity if Genesis 1 and 2 were objectively wrong? And I said, yeah. And he was like, scared. He's scared of that. And it's not just him, and he's come out of that anyway, so praise God. But that fear, because they really don't believe Genesis 1 and 2, and they want to believe the rest of the Bible. And so they're afraid that you'd have a doctrine that would actually, that would make them leave the faith. But they wouldn't. I think genuinely there are Christians who have that fear, like Isaiah, this guy that we had. I think he was genuinely a Christian before he came to the biblical inerrancy conclusion. I think that biblical inerrancy is a secondary issue. It's just a very important one. So I would think that, but there's just so many churches that aren't biblically errant churches. There's plenty of biblically inerrant churches out there that we don't need, flag-waving Reformation to fix that one. I would advocate that we believe in biblical inerrancy, but I don't know. I don't think that's a Reformation style issue.
I'm glad you're more optimistic then. We'll keep with an optimistic spirit in that case.
But I do despise errancy of the Bible advocates because it's just faithlessness. It's condoned, mystified, solidified, scholarized faithlessness. They don't believe Genesis 1 and 2.
Mm-hmm. A concern that I see primarily in Europe, and this is actually the inverse of what the earliest heresy was in the church. The earliest heresy was Gnosticism. Well, actually, Judaism, but they died. Gnostics, they believed that the divine is so great that you couldn't conceive of it coming into the physical world. Look how the tables have turned. People now, they only think of the physical world, and they think that the spiritual doesn't even exist. So I understand this is taking a step further beyond inerrancy, the Bible inerrancy, but there are those who say that this is people who call themselves pastors, or for female pastors, what would they be? Pastress,
pastorettes, yeah,
or priestess, I suppose. But that it's just a nice book of stories, and this is just a nice teaching and make the world.
I believe that Jesus rose from the dead, that Jesus is God. It's all code word for homosexuality is good, and I voted Democrat line. Oh gosh, I don't know how you twisted that one around. And equally, so on the Democrat front too, we talked about this too, but there are Christians who vote Democrat. Would I correct that? Yes. And I already said that I think that is wrong, not because Democrat is a word that is unholy and it says in the Bible, don't vote Democrat, but the values of the Democrat Party are not God's law. And so it's really a God's law issue. And so I would say that valuing the values that the Democrat Party value earnestly is a rebellion against God. Does that mean you're not a Christian? No, but it means you're a sinning Christian. So I would call it out as churches. And I don't think, like I said, I don't think that you as a church should rightfully tolerate such diverse political beliefs. So I do believe you can tolerate a large amount of differing political beliefs, but they need to be arguable from the Bible. And well argued from the Bible. So Democrats argue from the Bible by saying you should love your neighbor, therefore you should agree for 40% tax rates and redistribution to the poor. And then I would point to God's law and say that's not what God says how to care for the poor. And you're actually not only are you adding to God's law with random other laws, right? And I think that's like a tolerable. If you wanted to add random laws to God's law, I would disagree with that. I think we should stay to the base level, but it's arguable from the Bible. However, if you're directly refuting God's law, you're saying homosexuality is good. You're saying that abortion is good, that murder shouldn't be punished, that thievery shouldn't be punished, right? Those are the things that I would say. Not only are you you're not arguing from the Bible, right, correctly, but you're also refuting plain evidences from Scripture, plain teachings from Scripture, and therefore I would say that shouldn't be tolerated in church. You should be reprimanded for that. Doesn't mean you're not a Christian, but you should be reprimanded, just like you should be reprimanded for sexual morality, for thieving yourself. And so I would think if I was going to create some reformation in the church, I don't think it needs the Martin Luther style reformation. However, I would think the American church needs to recognize once again how political religion is, so that we apply it to our politics and don't tolerate that level of diversity in the church, because it's not healthy for people who are trapped by the lies of politics. And equally, it's not just Democrats. There are Republicans on the Republican side that have the R next to their name, right? And they're supporters of Donald Trump, but they advocate for abortion. There are plenty of Republicans that advocate for abortion. There's plenty of them that advocate for super high tax rates that aren't biblical. They advocate for foreign intervention and wars that the Bible wouldn't support. And so if they have the same kind of recognition of what God's law is, and then refutation of it because of their politics, I would say that should equally be corrected. Now, I think more often than not, the Democratic Party is anti-God's law than the Republican Party, but it stretches to any politic, right? It stretches to libertarianism and whoever, so it's not a pro-Republican message. It's really a pro-God's law message. And if I wanted to reform the church today, I would push on that front. You're saying biblical inerrancy is the bigger one.
Yes, because why would they listen to God's law if they don't? If they think that God in the Old Testament is a big meanie, and Jesus this nice different God, like, oh my gosh, that's another okay. Say Protestants, because we protest, that makes me lose 1 year of my life. I lose 5 years whenever someone says God in the Old Testament is mean, Jesus is.
I just think that like the layman, like scholars, maybe have a problem with biblical errancy, but like the layman, the regular Christians, have a problem with the politics issue, but not a problem with biblical inerrancy.
Mm-hmm.
So because they believe it, because they're regular old faithful Christians, right? So they're like, yeah, I believe the Bible. They haven't been to college yet, so they haven't learned all like weird things to be worried about. That Genesis 1 and 2 might not be right. So I would think the law thing is a bigger issue, but you're saying biblical inerrancy, which is valid. That's a good thing to reform the church if that's the problem. What do you think, Theodore? What would be your crusade if you could make one for the modern day church?
Well, I was just under the impression, like, what will it take to reform, or what should we do to reform?
Well, what would we be reforming to? So you said yourself that one of the big problems that you see is tolerance of evil, right? So what would you do? How would you reform the church out of that? You don't need like step by step or anything, but
nailing laptops to large wooden church doors.
Yeah, that's a start, right? Just slamming those things in. 95 Theses posted on the church door.
But relating to that, I think interdenominational discussion and like deliberate, disciplined discourse between different denominations, so that there's like enough transparency and education and teaching for all the church members, so that they can see for themselves, and that we can assume that most people are reasonable.
I mean, that's an assumption right there.
True, but what else can we do? Except assume the best in them or of them. So just, I think, good discussion like Luther was trying to make.
Okay. So let me try to summarize then. You would say Reformation, we should be reforming to a more like cohesive Christian body in the U.S. instead of being so separated with our denominations?
That would be good. Like, if there's a few denominations, sure, but if there are like 10 denominations and then 1,000 sub-denominations and then all these things, and people think that these differences are big, and some are. But yeah, I think a lot of discussion, transparency, and that would solve some of it. But then it's obviously up to the person who they choose, who they surround themselves with in their environment. And then
Well, and I've discussed on this podcast before, because this is just, so I'm just spitballing here. Don't take offense, Theodore. I have talked about, we had an episode titled, What Would It Take to Unify the Church? With the same principle. Like, what would it take for all the like faithful Protestant denominations in the U.S. to come together and form into one? And I think in one hand it's tempting. So this is just my opinion here. I think on one hand it's tempting to have us all unify, because separated we're kind of like the classic snake from the American Revolution, where it's like divided into 13 different parts and it says, separated we die, unite or die, whatever. So I'm forgetting the Gadsden flag's name, but unite or die, right? Because if you separate, you're going to die. You need to unite into one snake, and then you're a dangerous animal. I do think that would be useful. However, I also see the value in separate church denominations that carry like a certain sort of federalism, right? Like one might be doing a good thing, and then all the other churches that weren't doing that like learn from that church and then start doing that good thing. And because they were separate denominations, they weren't like in groupthink mode. And so they were able to experiment with different things and survive and thrive in better ways. Like the Methodists are a denomination that used to be faithful and now are increasingly becoming non-faithful. And if we were all in one denomination, that might have affected us a lot more, but it really doesn't affect me at all because the Methodists are their own denomination. And equally, I think the Reformation of the Southern Baptists, when they were super liberal in the 70s, but then their congregation was actually able to re-overtake the woke liberal leaders of the denomination to make it conservative again. And then other denominations followed suit because they realized how to do it from the Southern Baptist Convention. So like the Presbyterian Church of America did it, the Northern Baptist Coalition did it. So I would say that the federalism of denominations is actually pretty good. I don't know that would be my ideal Reformation in the U.S. is a combining of denominations, but
right. Okay. So I'm not saying that we should all become one denomination, like reverting back to Catholicism, basically putting too much power in one person's hand or even 100 people's hands to manage the whole United States or world.
Okay.
And I was just thinking that once you started going there, I knew where you were going, and that it's good for there to be at least some denominations and some sort of disconnected, maybe a bad word, but yeah, disconnected denominations, because then you can get away from the groupthink, and different denominations and organizations can then specialize in various things, try different things, and then they can be like separate experiments per se, so that we know what works or what works where, because maybe something works better in one place than it does in another place.
So I do like what you're saying in the sense of I had this experience with my church. So there's a lot of what's it called, like bubbles, like quote unquote Christian bubbles, that
Okay.
you focus more on your group more than also knowing what's out there. So you could be two things with this. You could be malicious about this, such as like some I think Westboro Baptist Church, like that's like clearly we would condemn a group like that, or you could just be passively unaware or ignorant about it. For example, until I read more in church history, I would have had difficulty understanding what Lutherans or Presbyterians believe, and and also with what you said before, Theodore, I think it's important too, having more education in Bible theology, study, application, and also I would throw in church history, would allow you to see common elements between denominations, and also it helps you and your church define what's important. What can you agree with? What do you say is like, whoa, we're brothers in Christ, but I think it's for the best to have our own separate, churches here. Otherwise, things might not go well. For example, baptism. Like I would hold hands with Presbyterians, I would hug them and kiss them. I mean, not to spook anybody, but here, but
Yeah,
out of
holy
cour-
kiss.
out of a
Holy
holy
kiss.
kiss, yes, yeah, and so just by being aware of what is your belief of your church, of your denomination, understanding a little bit of church history, getting some of that background, actually I would say, and having more conversation, more engagement with Lutherans. I don't think my church engages that much with other Lutherans or Presbyterians. Having that relation, that more or less bond, allows you to see, yes, there are more brothers and sisters in Christ out there, and it's like, oh, those people, they don't believe the Bible's real. Those people have female pastors. Those people allow abortions, whatever it may be. You can see clearly what is a matter of life or death, and then what is adiaphora.
Right, yeah. Okay. So, I'll just summarize. I want like a theonomic revolution, right? More religion equals politics. Not stumping for particular candidates, mind you. And we have episodes on exactly what my position is there. But that's what I would want a Reformation on. Sebastian, you're saying biblical inerrancy, but I can definitely get behind being the Reformation for today. But it's not. Are you in agreement that it's not a Martin Luther style Reformation, or do you think that's what is needed?
I would say it is, in the sense that he was calling awareness to a problem, and he's trying to like, hey, everybody, let's get back on track.
The outcome of his
Okay. Yes. Unfortunately, and thankfully not. Thankfully for the moment, maybe in Europe, but thankfully not in the U.S.
Yeah, Europe, it really is. That is the infection in Europe, isn't it? I think the U.S. is not there yet as far as like complete and utter faithlessness.
Yes, my poor family in Denmark. Let me tell you.
Yes.
It's not good.
I would agree with you, actually. Europe needs a Protestant Reformation style biblical inerrancy Reformation if something was going to happen there. But I just don't think we're quite there in the U.S. And Theodore, you think that the Reformation that would be very useful for the United States is if we had like a awareness of the other denominations, right? Uniting, even if we don't become one denomination, we just unite as brothers and sisters in Christ across the nation. Is that your description?
Right, because even I wouldn't want us to totally conform to each other,
right?
But maybe even in some of that, there would be some theological unity.
Okay.
Per se.
There should be, right? We all unite on the basics.
Right. Yeah.
All right. And do you think that would be like Protestant Reformation style, or smaller, or bigger?
No comment.
Okay. No comment. Well, I'm assuming by the nature of it that a uniting of different denominations can't be like Reformation style, because the Reformation was a splitting. So,
well, there might be, because there are some churches that might say
that
we don't want to communicate with others. We want to do our thing. But yeah.
So yes, I guess it could be, but that would be a very strange. You'd be uniting and dividing. So I don't think it would quite be the Protestant Reformation style thing. Okay. All right. Well, those are just our musings. So we've talked about the Protestant Reformation, what it was in general, not all the details because you could go on all day, but the good stuff about it, the bad stuff about it, what it would take to reform today, and then what we'd want it to reform to, just our thoughts. So this has been a great celebration of the Reformation. I'd like to pass it to you guys if you have any last thoughts for our Reformation celebration today. All right. Toast. That is why we have found our cause in serving the Lord Jesus Christ. Thanks for listening. I've been Michael, the man behind the machine. To my right, your left has been
Sebastian, the bookkeeper.
And virtually it's been
Theodore, under the PC, person of Christ.
If you want to see the rest of our episodes, you can go to foundcause.podbean.com and download them all for your listening pleasure. That's just audio only, though. If you want to see our beautiful, handsome faces and Theodore virtually right here floating in amongst us with our cool special effects, you should go to facebook.com/foundcause to look at all our videos. We're also on YouTube. You can search us there, Found Cause on YouTube as well. We're also on iTunes and Spotify and wherever else you might find your podcast these days, where you can listen to us on 3x speed. God bless you if you can do that. Until next time, we will watch something completely different. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.